Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Adam Balderstone for another episode of Bedrock and Balderstone, where we're going to be talking about the third episode of I, Claudius, What Shall We Do About Claudius? This episode, like a lot of them, it has sort of two basic threads running through it. The first is the disaster of the Teutoburg forest, where 3 Roman legions are destroyed, and the other one is Livia is attempting to eliminate Postumus as the clear heir to Augustus's role. And so we even see where Augustus essentially says directly to Postumus during the episode that he wants him to succeed him, and Livia overhears, and she devises a really nefarious scheme where she gets Livilla, Claudius's sister, to seduce Postumus, which she's already been doing, so she's really just kind of using the existing situation. And Livilla then accuses Postumus of rape in the middle of the act. Everybody rushes in. She plants a dagger that she took from his house, and Postumus gets exiled. But he escapes before his exile, and he tells Claudius about it. And there's also a minor thread in the story about Claudius trying to write the history of his father and grandfather, which is sort of more the overarching story in the overall series. But he gets to meet Livia and Pollio, and but his history is taken by Livia, and he's given the advice from Pollio and from Postumus to play the fool, so that he can avoid being poisoned like his father or grandfather, according to Pollio. So I know that was a fairly sloppy retelling of the episode, but what did you think, Adam?
Yeah, this is a very good episode. I mean, it's interesting because it's one where things are kind of brought out into the open a little bit. I mean, you have Claudius's conversation with the historians where where he just gets that advice you talked about, where Claudius learns about the poisoning for the first time, and of course with Postumus, you have Postumus is the first person on the show to attempt standing up to Livia and saying, "Look, can't you see what she's doing?" And it's ultimately, it doesn't achieve anything, but it's an interesting episode with these things coming more to the forefront.
Yeah, because it clearly, like Claudius, this is where he really becomes aware of what's actually going on. And that scene with the 2 scholars, that's one of my favorite scenes in the series. I always remember that scene. So he's at the library, and we see Asinius Pollio and Titus Livius, and they're sort of like they're kind of presented as an odd couple here, where Livia is a little bit more temperamental and arrogant, and Pollio is a little bit more of a playful old man. And Pollio clearly takes more of a liking to Claudius when Pollio asks Claudius, when Claudius recognizes them and says that they're the 2 great historians of Rome, which one he prefers, and he says, "Well, you can't like both equally, you have to choose." And Claudius says it depends. And initially, Pollio is like, "Oh, he's just a coward. He can't even give his opinion." He says, "No, for beauty of language, I would go with Livy, but for accuracy and interpretation of the facts, I would go with Pollio." And for historians, the better, the more flattering statement is the one that he gives to Pollio. A historian wants to have their interpretation of the facts be praised. They're not as concerned about the beauty of language. In fact, historians are generally kind of a little bit suspicious of historians who write too beautifully. So Livy is infuriated, and he sort of storms off. And then, to add insult, Claudius corrects him, because he was looking when he comes into the library, he says he's looking for a book by Polemocles that's a commentary on Polybius's military tactics. And Claudius says, it's actually where is it? It's actually Polemocrates' dissertation on tactics, and he's a Jew, not a Greek. And Livy is really upset and says, I don't take kindly to being corrected, so I hope you're right. And but it's a really fun scene. It
is, and I think one part I liked you missed is when after Claudius gives his opinion on each of the historians, and it's like, oh, now you please neither of us.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I was looking to tell the truth. I wasn't looking to please anyone. And Paul was like, oh, well, you'll make a good historian.
and that's one of the central themes of the series, and I think that's why that scene stands out so much, is that Claudius is really, like, his whole thing is the truth. He's looking for the truth. And again, today that's kind of a quaint idea, but I think it's starting to come back into fashion, where people are starting to understand the value of objective truth. And that's what Claudius stands for. He stands for this belief that there is a real truth out there, and he's trying to seek it. I think just the way the scene is done is just so wonderful. It's also the way that these historical figures just walk onto the stage, and again, it's not done in a stately way. They're done like this. This could be pulled out of a sitcom. The way that Livy and Pollio are interacting with each other. Yeah, it's a very charming moment in the show. And my retelling of it does not do it justice, but
you don't even really need to know who they are either. The first time I watched the show, and I was a lot younger, I wasn't familiar with either of these characters. But the scene just works fantastically, whether you are familiar with them at all.
Yeah. And it's also the kind of scene I think you with this series, some people you'll probably be familiar with, some people you won't. But what it's going to do is it's going to give you a reason to be interested in those figures when you do try to learn about them. So if you don't know who Livia is, you certainly will have a mental image in your mind that'll make you curious. So, and I find that with all the characters. Do you know what I mean? I think like for example, when I first saw this, I don't think I knew who Sejanus was. I immediately became very interested in, and then I was amazed to find out that there was a real Sejanus, and all these really interesting things happened around him. It was this is the kind of show where I think it works well at all levels. If you know who all the people are, it's going to be interesting for you, but it's interesting if you are just being introduced to them through the show, and then you can go and learn about them. It's kind of like the show almost can function as a weird mnemonic device, because it's introducing you to so many important figures that you'll that when you encounter them, if you read about Rome later, they'll stick in your head a little better. Just like if you've seen Spartacus, you're not when you read when you read the history of Rome and you get to Spartacus, you'll know who they're talking about.
Exactly.
So, but what were some of the other things that you thought were good in this episode?
Let's see. General question there. Well, to go back, one thing was notable. You brought up in an earlier episode how there was going to be at some point somewhere in the show where Livia talks about her feelings about the previous civil wars and and bringing stability with an emperor and so on. And I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about that scene, because once she does say all the words, but I feel like still her whole motivation is just to put Tiberius in charge. And I feel like it's just, I just wonder how much is that anything she feels, and how much is that part of her drawing someone into her side? Because she just goes, "Hey, I just want my son to be." She needs to put some favorable spin to win her over to her side. And so, maybe there's a kernel of truth in there, but I feel like Livia does so many things. Every time she assassinates someone, it never quite happens, but there's always the potential that if this was exposed, you'd be blowing this whole thing up. You'd be destroying Rome, and so it's like I can't really buy stability as her end real result.
Well, and she makes a somewhat disingenuous argument there, because she says that Augustus is so just to set up the stage here, because this is a really crucial scene. Livia at the beginning of the episode, she spots that Livilla and Postumus are exchanging glances at the family dinner. And Livilla is married to Castor, who's Tiberius's son, and Postumus is Agrippa and Julia's son. And so Livia has, once she recognizes this, she sees a path to getting rid of Postumus so that Tiberius will have a clear, unhindered road to the throne. So what she ends up doing is she summons Livilla to her room, and she essentially does the same thing she did to her that she had done to Lucius, I think, earlier in the previous episode. Right? Was that Lucius that she had done that to with Julia?
Yeah. It was definitely a similar move there, definitely.
And so she basically says, "I know what you guys are doing. How dare you? How dare you? How dare you do this scandalous thing?" You know, and Livilla weeps and apologizes and says, "I'll never do it again." She says, don't be so hasty. Don't be so hasty." You know, and so she does this thing that she always does, where she sort of. It's sort of feigns sincerity, but there's like a little kernel of truth to the sincerity as well. And she says, you know, "Can I speak to you as a grown woman now?" And she says, and then she tells her about the horrors of the Civil War and how there was all this instability and how, you know, the thing that will prevent the instability from returning is having a single person at the helm. But if there's any doubt about the you know, who's next in line, there will be factions in civil war again. And so her job is to remove any doubt, and presently the doubt is because Augustus is sort of moving back and forth between Tiberius and Postumus. And we see no evidence of this at all. All we see is Augustus's disdain for Tiberius, and that he and it even clearly states to Postumus, "I intend to make you my heir." Basically, there's a scene where and Livia overhears it, so she's clearly making a disingenuous argument. And so I still think that ultimately Livia is. I think there's more to it than she's just trying to put Tiberius on the throne. I think she thinks she can do that and preserve Rome at the same time. And I think she's underestimating the risks that she's taking and overestimating her own abilities to control it, because I think she's a powerful character who believes in her own ability to manipulate everybody without fail. And as we see that, I mean, to a degree she succeeds, but as she ages, her abilities there diminish, and she makes a few serious mistakes in judgment of people. But up until this point, she's been pretty successful at what she's doing. She doesn't have any reason to doubt her own abilities, really. There have been a couple of hiccups along the way, but she's even got Tiberius back after being exiled.
Well, see, my feeling is the cracks are already showing, in that you even have people, like you have the historians there willing to talk to Claudius about her poisoning and stuff, which goes back to my stability thing. It's like she's already made it to the point where if Tiberius becomes emperor, people are going to go, well, he only got there because their mother murdered everyone who would have been a good candidate. So it's like she's already, it's like her path to putting Tiberius on the throne is by making everyone doubt his his true right to have it.
And I don't think you're wrong. And I think the show, I mean, very interesting thing about the show is to watch Claudius's response to Livia, because we're really supposed to see this through the eyes of Claudius, I think. And there is a strong love, hate, respect thing going on with Livia as a figure in his life, where he clearly hates her. Like, he clearly has these, I mean, he has powerful negative feelings towards her, but he also is very dutiful towards her. And there's a degree of sympathy towards her from Claudius. And so I don't know, I think Livia eventually passes away over the course of the show, and so I think by that point we'll have more room for discussion. But I think you're right in that the argument she was making here was clearly self-serving.
It's ambiguous, I mean, which is interesting. It's like I like it when you can't completely nail down what's going on in Livia's head. That's a good thing about the show. So either interpretation can be argued, but I don't know. I honestly don't know.
And I think it's an interesting scene. It's also interesting that like I think Livilla is just a diminutive form of Livia, right? So they're kind of mirroring these characters.
Oh yeah,
they're sort of she's like a pale imitation of Livia is how I always see Livilla.
Yeah.
And so it's there's also a cool line in here because Livilla is present. So number one, they say in the episode that she's meant to be very beautiful, and the actress playing her is very beautiful. And historically, that's something that's noted about Livilla. And so in the scene, when Livia compliments her beauty, she says, "I heard that you were, once, the most beautiful woman in the world," or something to that effect. And she says, "Well, no, there was one other woman," and she hints at, but she was in Egypt, and so she's clearly talking about Cleopatra. But then she says, "But she never lasted, and I'm still around." Yeah. So I think it was an interesting moment in the show. But also the other thing that happens this episode, very important, is the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, where a courier arrives, I think late at night. I can't remember exactly what's going on, but he arrives late at night, and Augustus is kind of annoyed. He sort of, the courier's dirty. He's like, "Why haven't you bathed?" And it's like not dawning on him quite yet. Like,
well, he usually too is angry. He's like, "Oh, you want me to read these now? What? I'm going to bed." It's like he's just it's such an interesting attitude he has at this point in the show.
And so. He says that he basically reports that Quintilius Varus's legions have been destroyed. 3 legions were destroyed in a boneheaded move, and only one officer kept his head, Cassius Chaerea, who we are going to want to remember that name. Cassius Chaerea is an important person down the road in this story, and they just kind of name drop him. You might not even notice it, but they plant the seed there, and he's basically the guy who sent the courier there. And Augustus almost loses his mind over this, like the loss of these 3 legions. Gaul is completely exposed now, and I mean it's just a complete military disaster. And this is a very significant Roman military defeat. So it was an interesting moment in the show, and Augustus has to spend the rest of the episode sort of sending Germanicus and Tiberius to deal with it. First he sends Tiberius, and he gets one of Tiberius's reports, and he's not impressed at all, and he says he's just building bridges all day, and just doing drills, and Livia's trying to calm him, and so he wants to send Postumus as a criticism, basically, and Livia talks him into sending Germanicus, and all these things with Postumus eventually happen, and so Postumus.
Yeah, of course she needs Postumus at home so she can carry out her plan. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny to see how calm she is in that scene and not giving any real indication of her actual intentions to Augustus. Mm-hmm. And it's also interesting to see that they're kind of an elderly bickering couple now, where she's interfering with his military decisions, and he's furious that she's telling him who to send, and he's just and it's clear that Augustus is sort of the one who is flustered, and Livia is the one who's kind of in control. But the potential for her to go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say, I mean, the balance has shifted. Like I said in the earlier, and it was brought up at the end of the last episode that Augustus's mind is starting to go. That was specifically stated, and it's like at the beginning of the show, Augustus seemed to a lot of the times be kind of aware when Livia was trying to manipulate him, whereas now she can just kind of play him, and he's just can't keep up with her at all really anymore. Even he gets blustery and angry, but he doesn't really see her angles anymore.
Though we also do kind of see the seeds of her being pushed out a little bit by Augustus down the road. There's a point where
that's true,
where he sort of reclaims things. Obviously, he fails in the end, but we see sort of, in that scene where they're bickering and she's encroaching on his military decision. I think that's also sort of where that doubt is starting to really form in his mind. Another thing that happens too, because the name of the episode is "What Shall We Do About Claudius?" and what that's actually referring to is what to do about his seating at the games in honor of his father, because they're going to have games honoring Drusus Nero, a gladiatorial match, and so Livia is asking Augustus, "What do we do about, he's a public embarrassment. So where does he sit in your box?" Augustus has his box at the arena, and so they decide to position him in the back, and he still ends up making a fool of himself. And at the games, we get some interesting details. Number one, Claudius falls over, which is entirely expected. But unexpected, Augustus says, "That happened to me once," which is kind of a curious line.
I like Livia completely pretending not to remember. It's like she clearly remembers, but we're not talking about that. She doesn't. Yeah. She doesn't want that topic brought up. It's not a reminiscence she cares to enjoy.
Well, and a recurring thing in the show that becomes clear is Claudius. Claudius begins to basically make all of the mistakes that Augustus made. Do you know what I mean? He has a lot of the same flaws. He essentially becomes Augustus in a way over the course of the show. And so I thought that line is very interesting because it's really, we've seen hints of it before, but this is really the first explicit, I did something exactly the same as Claudius once. And, it kind of connects them in a... Yeah,
I hadn't thought about that, but that is a nice thing behind the scene there.
Well, because Claudius has all the same woman problems that Augustus ends up having. He has the blood. He's wearing this. He ends up wearing the same exact blinders that Augustus does. He ends up essentially being a similar kind of ruler in a lot of ways, and definitely. Even though the character has very strong Republican sentiment early on in the show, by the time he's emperor, that's, he still holds on to it as like something, like almost like a something you might adorn yourself with to make you, to separate yourself from others, but he's not at all, there's no real effort made to restore the Republic. So anyways, we'll get to that.
Well, for that matter, too, it's, even Augustus has that. Augustus has his moment earlier in the series where he's like, maybe it's time for me to step down. And so even that is a connection. Augustus is a guy, there's somewhere in his brain where he's like, I'm going to bring the Republic back someday. But no, it's never going to happen.
So it was a throwaway line, but it was interesting. But we also see Herod in the box, and Herod and Augustus make a bet. And we get to see everybody's reaction to the fights. And the only one who has any trouble with watching the bloodshed is Claudius. Everybody else is pretty interested in the carnage.
And of course, it has the good setup there with his discussion with Herod, where Claudius is explaining. It's like, no, this is perfectly fine. It's religious ritual and blah blah blah. And it's like intellectually he's so on board with this, but when he actually sees the real thing itself, it's like, he totally can't handle it.
Well, and what's even more interesting too about that is this is a point in time when it's established in the show, and I think this matches up pretty good with the history. But I have heard a lot of different things, and I know that the interpretation of gladiator stuff is kind of seems to always be shifting, but in the show we know that they've kind of gone WWE at this point with a lot of what they do. And so Livia actually goes before I think there's a guild that she like a gladiator guild of some kind who she before the game speaks to, and she says, "Look, I don't want any of these tricks anymore. Like the games are being degraded by increasing use of professional tricks to stay alive." And so she says she doesn't want any kiss in the ring stuff, and she ends up offering them freedom in coin, basically, if they put on a good show. And she even points out, like, she knows all the tricks, like the pig's bladder with the sheep's blood and all this stuff. So what Claudius is probably watching is probably a real, actual, violent death match of some kind. Because she puts an end to any. It removes any doubt on the viewer that what Claudius is seeing is fake blood. So I always kind of like that scene because I feel like it holds up given a lot of the conversations you see now around, how real gladiator fights were. It's sort of an interesting, interesting way to deal with it in the show. But yeah, and also I did like the stuff with Herod because Herod's a really interesting character, and there's not really a big exchange, but he and Augustus talk about the gods, and he talks about the god the god of the Jews, and Augustus saying, well, why don't you just take one of our gods? We have so
plenty.
many, and he says, oh no, our God is more than enough. It's a very, just to see him thread that diplomatic line was interesting. You get a lot of information about his character in that scene, and yeah. So I know. And the other thing that happens this episode is Claudius gets married to Regula Nilla, and the name kind of says it all. In the book, you really learn a lot more about her character. She's a much more important figure, and I think it's even suggested that she resembles Tiberius, and she might be Tiberius's illegitimate daughter. But but in the show, the one thing we know about her is she's like 7 feet tall, and it's a very embarrassing moment for Claudius where when they're getting married, they both stand up and she's just towering over him, and everybody starts laughing. Even Claudius's friend Agrippa is laughing hysterically at this. So it's a for him it's a pretty embarrassing moment, and the episode opened up with him just kind of staring off into the distance, and at the end of the episode it closes with what he's staring at is that he's kind of like looking at that scene. He's reflecting on that moment, and so it's it's a deeply embarrassing scene for him. And Livia, sort of leads the humor with a line about how she just kept growing and growing and growing because the marriage was arranged when they were like 9. So yeah, I thought go ahead.
I thought another good interaction between Livia and Claudius was the one right at the beginning of the episode where Claudius has set his cup down, and then like about a minute later he gets up and like spills it all over the floor. She's like, I was wondering when you would get around to knocking that out. It's just such a funny, it's such a classic kind of thing where you see someone put something somewhere precarious, you're just waiting for it to fall.
No, and Livia would definitely notice that, and
yes,
and also to see him, he gets on his knees and tries to help the slaves clean up, and it just makes the situation even worse. And then she's furious that he's doing the slaves' work. So it's but it's also a scene that's like, it's very like, I think a lot of people have been in the situation he was in. I know I have. I know. Anybody who's had a clumsy moment where you just exacerbate it by trying to make it better, and so he's a very simple, like, I don't know, he's a very easy character to identify with, Claudius.
Yes.
But yeah, so but we get all the important stuff. We get a lot of the we get the clumsiness and the twitching and the stammering that was apparent when he was a kid, but now you really, like, in Derek Jacobi's hands, it's it's a really good performance, I think. I think this is the first episode, right, where we really get to see it. So
we've only had the frame scenes with him as an old man. This is the first scene where we get to see him young, and it's the first episode where we get to see him as a young man, and it's also the first. I mean, he was a character in the previous episode, but he was very much just a sideline. They had the kid playing him, and he, like I said, I mean, his his stammer was a lot more apparent because he's actually engaging with characters fully in scenes in this episode in a way that he isn't in others.
And it's interesting too because it's there's a distinction drawn between a stutter and a stammer in this series. I know that, and I think it's Jacoby, right? I think I mispronounced his name just now.
It's Jacoby,
but there was an interview with Derek Jacoby where he explained that how he learned about the difference between the two, and that this was more of a stammer. And my sister had a stutter as a kid, so I always thought it was kind of is interesting. And I like the way, I don't know, what I like about the way when he stammers in the show is, number one, he does a very good job of it. But also, I like watching the characters' reactions as they're waiting for him to finish what he's saying, because that tells you so much about the other characters. You kind of get a sense of what they think about him, how patient they are with that sort of thing. And so it was very good. But I thought overall a very good episode. And I think it's we're coming up on the 30-minute mark, so time for us to head out. I don't know, any closing thoughts before we do so?
No, I think that about covers it for me.
I guess the only other thing I wanted to add is we got a couple of interesting points of comparison here that were reflective of each other. We got the scene with Pollio and Livy, where you have the two historians being sort of contrasted. But there's also a scene where Horace is delivering a poem at the start of the episode. And I apologize, the phone is ringing in the background. I can't do anything about it. But Horace is delivering a poem, and Augustus sort of praises Horace, and then starts talking about Ovid and saying that Ovid is too smutty for his tastes, and so it's a nice little sort of two figures, historians and poets sort of contrasted with each other.
It was another kind of nice point of casting things in contemporary for the time terms, because I mean those were just those things were exactly the kind of things my grandmother would say during the 70s about you say, yeah, that person can sing, but this music is just so smutty and stuff, kind of with the whole 60s, 70s vibe that was going on at the time. It really kind of, like I said, it's just one of those points where they were trying to make the era more relatable to people in the 70s.
It was an amusing scene, and also if you know about Ovid, it's an appropriate kind of.
Oh yeah, it is. It's.
But I like. But that's what I like about. Again, we mentioned it earlier, but like I like how when they bring historical figures into the scene, it's done in a way where they feel like real characters. They don't. It doesn't feel like, oh, we have to be all in awe of Augustus. We can put this fun line of dialogue in the mouth of Augustus, and it works. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be like if I it's intuitive now because we know of the series. But if this had never been done, and if the books had never been written, I feel like it wouldn't be a natural, intuitive thing to characterize Augustus in this way. Do you know what I mean? It's a very unusual move. In fact, it was one of the things I liked the series Rome, but one of the things I really hated about it was the different characterization of Augustus in that. It was kind of an interesting take on him, but I felt like this was such a superior approach.
Oh yeah, I liked the interpretation as far as being a TV show in the first season, if I remember, in HBO's Rome. I remember they switched actors as he got older, and I can't remember specifics. It's been too long since I watched it. I need to go back and watch it again. But I seem to remember the second actor seemed weaker to me.
They played him as like cold, and I don't know. It was almost like they were trying to make him like marble. Do you know what I mean? Like by the time,
I agree. I agree.
But then they threw in like a weird BDSM thing between him and Livia that didn't make a lot of sense. Like it never was. I didn't like. Not that I objected to it being there, but I didn't understand why it was there. It just didn't.
Yeah, I think that was, like I said, I think that was the second season version of the character where the different actor.
It was like
So,
it was like the obligatory HBO sexiness that they had to throw in, and I don't mind that if it adds something, like if it's like adding something to it. But when it was just kind of thrown in, it was sort of like, wait, why is that there? It's because it seemed significant, but it wasn't ever really explained.
yeah, well, there was definitely obligatory sexiness in that show. I can't remember which character it was, but I remember one character they kind of made her into Julia from I Claudius.
Oh,
like
yeah,
they were,
Julia of the Addii. Wasn't that who they?
I think which didn't.
But see, that didn't bother me as much because it made sense for the character that they were. You know what I mean? Like that stuff.
Mhm.
I remember the other stuff, and like the stuff with who was the big sort of awkward guy in Rome? I mean, there were two centurions or two soldiers that were the main characters, and one of them was tall and kind of goofy, and the other one was more serious. Was Apollo? Was that his name?
Oh, I could
can't
not
remember
their names. But
he had he had a lot of scenes at brothels and stuff, and those made total sense because of his character. I didn't have any objection to him. It was just the stuff with, it was like I just didn't get the stuff they were doing with Livia and Augustus. It just didn't make sense.
Honestly, I can't remember it that well. It is a show I need to watch again sometime.
But actually, in the books, in the you don't see this in the series, but in the I Claudius story, the reason that Augustus and Livia have no children is because he's impotent around her. So, you can do interesting things with that stuff, but like in that, but that there's a certain amount of sense in that. Do you know what I mean? Like he's, and you can delve into it in a number of ways, whether it's just, he's intimidated by her, or he feels guilty because of the circumstances in which they got married, or other things. But, so I mean, it's not like that stuff is absent, from the material even in here, but it just is done in a more interesting way, I think. But anyways, I don't know. At some point, maybe we'll do Rome as well when we.
I'd be up for that.
But yeah, so I guess we'll head out and we'll be back on. I think probably on Sunday with episode 4, which is this is the best. This is one of the best titles. Poisonous Queen. Yeah, I think we're gonna get into some very interesting stuff soon. So we're leading up to the Sejanus and then the Caligula and all the fun bits. So all right, so we will let you go and we will talk to you later.